Hi guys. Hi, it's Miss Sarah from the West Bank Club, and we're doing another installment of The Dreadful Fate of Jonathan York. Where we last left off, he was with some thieves that pushed him into some gross water where a big monster is about to eat him. Alright, are we ready to find out and see what happens? Alright, let's dive back in. He had just enough time to glimpse the mass of tentacles and stalk eyes before a colossal mouth engulfed his body and swallowed him whole. The horror of being eaten alive was too much for Mr. York, and his brain switched off for a minute or two. When he regained consciousness, he found himself in a slimy, pulsating chamber. Where am I? He wondered. It didn't take him long to remember the ugly truth. He was in the Bogmire's belly. He struggled to overcome his rising panic and think clearly. What was he supposed to do in here? Was he expected to get something, wasn't he? A key! Yes, he needed to find a key. But why did it matter now? Why shouldn't he put all this effort into escaping with his life? Because if you escaped without the key, the West Fleetport gang will send you right back in, warned his now coherent brain. His hands searched blindly in the surrounding slosh until they nudged something small and metal. His fingers probed the object. Yes, it was a key. He clutched it in his left hand. Step one, done. Now the hard part, getting back out. He extended his legs and kicked the slippery walls around him. They stretched, but snapped back into place as soon as his feet pulled away. He kicked again, harder this time. Still no use. The Boglemire was built to handle prey much stronger than measly Mr. York. He tried reaching up, hoping he might grab a hold of the beast's tonsils and trigger a gag reflex. No luck. The Bogglemire's gullet had constricted. He took a deep, sobbing breath. The air was stale, stifling, and now he feared he might suffocate. And how long did Blime say he had before the creature's stomach acid did its work? Now he could feel his own airway closing as anxiety set in, and his whole body started to tremble. He frantically clawed at the beast's stomach. Something wriggled. A gut parasite, most likely. He recoiled with a moan and surrendered to the panic attack. Mr. York's torso jolted. He was no stranger to anxiety-inducing hiccups. Knees were especially powerful. Over the years, he'd learned tricks for stalling the hiccups, but it all seemed so pointless now. He would be digested for sure. And in a few hours, the Boglemire would spit up his grisly remains. Hic! 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 Mr. York froze. Had that last hiccup really come from him? Certainly not. The belly chamber jostled violently, and Mr. York was flung into elastic walls. He struggled to right himself, only to be thrown by yet another ultra-hic. Somehow the jolting of Mr. York's own hiccups had triggered a massive hiccup attack in his consumer. Mr. York's body was tossed back and forth like a grape in a bowl of Jell-O. An unsettling thought flickered through his mind. What's worse, being liquefied alive by digestive juices or being rattled to a pulp by monstrous hiccups? Luckily, Mr. York was to suffer neither. The Boglemire had decided a seemingly harmless snack had turned disagreeable. It was time to jettison the irritant. And so with one great phlegm-rotting blah, the monster emptied its stomach, and Mr. York was launched from the pit like a human lugate. He landed in a pile at the edge of the pit, scarcely recognizable under slime. He rasped for air and rolled onto his back, relishing fresh oxygen and a victory over improbable odds. Sadly, his relief was short-lived, for when he opened his eyes, he found the grotesque faces of the West Fleetport gang beaming down at him. "Did you get the key?" said Mr. Blime. Mr. York unclamped his fingers of his left hand, and the key fell to the ground. He'd been squeezing it so hard, it left a perfect imprint in his palm. "Good," Mr. Blime cooed. I must say we had some doubts regarding your, shall we say, abilities, Mr. York. Perhaps we underestimated you. The eight-legged snatched the key while the eel-neck thief hauled Mr. York to his feet. Now that I've got your key, I'd like you to do me a favor, please, Mr. York said between coughs. Mr. Blonde turned to Mr. York, his dagger-toothed smile unfaltering. Anything, dear friend. I want you to show me a place I can spend the night, so in the morning I may leave the swamp and go home. Blyme uttered a low gurgling chuckle. Of course, Mr. York, of course. But now we're in the midst of a treasure hunt, and cutting a treasure hunt down to its prime is hardly proper protocol. Am I right, Scabclaw? Oh, he's indeed, snickered the eight-legger. Aye, said Mr. Blyme. Now come along, comrades. The game is nigh. Mr. York resisted the urge to object. He figured the worst was over and preferred to stay on Blyme's good side, assuming such a thing existed. The canopy waned and retreated, and the trees were replaced by stretches of bone-like reeds. A mist surrounded the treasure hunters, wrapping them in tendrils, turning the world white. The swamp dissolved into a marshland. Mr. Blyme stopped and pointed out at the motionless water. Out there! Mr. York felt a chill skitter down his spine. What's out there? Our treasure, of course. The one we were hunting for. The only one that was stolen from us. Who stole it? Mr. Blyme ignored the question. Now, to get our treasure back, we need someone to cross the marsh. Since our friend Mr. York handled the Boglemire so commendably, I feel obliged to nominate him for the job. Wait, what? Mr. York said. The eel-neck thief raised his blaze. I'll second that. Oh, third, hollered Helmet Head. All in favor of sending Mr. Dear York across the marsh, say aye. Aye, 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 cheered the thieves in unison. All opposed? Mr. York raised a meek hand. 5 against 1, you float, Mr. York. Now hold on a minute, stammered Mr. York. I got the key back, didn't I? Does that mean someone else should take a turn doing the dirty work? You might believe so, grinned Blyme, but it'd be a shame to pull a winner. Likened yourself to an alt when you're on such a winning streak. Mr. York tried to argue, but the glitter of Mr. Blyme's blade in the mist ended further debate. What is it you want me to do? In the middle of the water is a rocky island. The safest way to get there is to float yourself across something sturdy and buoyant. You mean a boat? Interrupted Miss York. We don't have a boat. The guard-faced thief pulled back a clump of reeds to reveal a large wooden barrel turned on its side. No boat, but this'll do nicely. So, continued Blyme, after floating on the barrel to the island, you'll find a cave. In the cave is a chest of our gang's insignia on it. Same as the key. Bring it back to us, and we'll show you out of the swamp to a safe house. What lives in the cave? Mr. York asked. Mr. Blyme's grin widened. The Terra Kingpin. And what's that? Never you mind. With a bit of luck, it'll be out hunting. If not, 'twas a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. York. Mr. York wiped dried slime from his brow. Very well, but this is the last favor I do for you thieves. He bent and lifted the barrel, but Mr. Blyme snagged his wrist before he could cast off. Hold yourself, Mr. York. There's one more thing. We didn't tell you about the Firmgnat. Mr. York licked his lips. What's the Firmgnat? Not another monster, I hope. The Firmgnat dwells in the deeper parts of the marsh. It's not as big as the Boglemire, but just as hungry. Lucky for you, it's deaf and blind. Then why should I fear it? You shouldn't. You're in danger if you do. It can sense your fear. I don't understand. Then listen close. The trick to getting past the Firmgnat is not to be afeared. That's where the name Firmgnat comes from. You do show fear, it'll seek you out and swallow you up quicker than a twitch of a weevil's feelers. But I can't force myself to be unafraid, sputtered Mr. York. Then you'd best learn fast, try thinking happy thoughts, like you do when you off pixie dust. Mr. York stalled a moment and looked pleadingly into the faces of the West Fleetport gang. He saw no hints of sympathy. Took a heavy breath, lifted the barrel with "Dang the torpedoes, haste," and cast off. He clung to the dry side of the barrel, praying it would not flip and dunk him. The thieves faded into the mist. Mr. York found himself alone in a sightless, soundless world. Occasionally a reed would brush against the barrel's undersides, and his heart would race. He squeezed his eyes shut and tried to ignore what might be lurking beneath the surface. All right, we're going to stop it here for this time, and we'll see what's in this misty water. Let's hope Mr. Yorks makes it out okay. All right, see you next time.